we're going to switch gears and continue on the journey, but from a slightly different perspective. Kelly Herrel is with us from Brocade Communications and is going to share with us perspectives on bringing solutions to market that include open source in SDN and other areas, and also in parallel with other parts of solutions that are privately developed by companies providing overall packages. So Kelly, please take it away. The green button.
You. Got it. Well, I always enjoy coming to these events. It is always a lot of fun to watch the sharing of information and the potential for innovation that's coming to the front. You know, it produces opportunities where you get a bunch of smart people on stage, and me. Thank you. You know, while we talk about the innovations, we talk about the open source and community development. One of the things that's really crucial as service providers move toward a stronger embrace of software and open source software in network infrastructure is that there be an ecosystem of suppliers there where needed. And that is definitely a requirement for the market to move forward, because there are a lot of operators and enterprises who need to have that vendor stand between them and the open source development model. And it's a very, very different business model to be in the commercial open source arena. I've done it for a long time in various factors. I've done a lot of proprietary development as well, right tool for the right job. But the difference between proprietary and open source from a business model is so significant. It's not a linear progression. It's a non-linear progression. It's very, very different. And I think just a little vignette to give you an indication of just how different that is and how different the thinking has to be is I had dinner with Billy Marshall a few years back. Billy was the original head of sales for Red Hat. And he was telling me about his first days selling Red Hat Linux and making a lot of small deals happen. And then one day it happened, and he closed $1 million deal. And he came back to his board, and he said, it happened. I closed $1 million deal with this enterprise. And his own board members didn't really still understand the business model, the value proposition. How could that be? You know, it's free. How could you possibly have sold $1 million? What did you sell him? One of his board members said, what did you sell him? And he said, are we progressing on the slides here? Right. So when your own board member and an investor isn't really sure what you sold him, he said, you sold him $1 million bag of air. And you know, Billy, he said, no, you don't understand. He said, we sell software. And his board member said, but it's free. I still don't understand. Don't you sell support? What do you sell? And Billy said, no. He said, we sell software. We sell software that is supported. In some sense, that's the same as in the proprietary model. You sell software and it's supported. But Billy said to the point that it's so important that customers understand we're buying software here. Yes, there's a different model by which it comes around and a different engagement model to maintain it. But he said, I will actually fire a sales rep that tries to close the deal based on the value of support. He said, you have to understand that this is about software. And software and support is bundled together often in an open source arena, especially under like a copyleft license, primarily to be able to make sure that there is that supported model, but it's also that it's legally tied to something that is binding. And in that sense, you know, when you think about open source and you think about free, it's been said before many years ago, we're talking about free as in freedom, not free as in free beer. Okay? So when you think about what is so different about open source as it affects a business model, is that, well, there's a lot of things that are different. And the list is even much bigger than this. You know, this is not exhaustive. But a couple of things that I would pull out just as commentary on these. One is community. If you don't have a thriving developer community, you don't have what we're looking for here. We're looking for a lot of contribution from a lot of places. If you don't have that, if you have a coding project, but not a thriving developer community, all you have is a vendor. Okay? That's not the same thing. Community is where it all happens. And a lot of open source projects don't actually get that kind of snowballing effect in the community. The second is customer. And the point being here that there has to be a mutual benefit between the customer and the community. If that mutual benefit does not find its way to the fore, then the whole the whole idea is dead. It's just not going to happen. Other things that you could talk about in here, but one that I really want to bring out is pace. The pace of development in a thriving open source project is outstanding. It just overwhelms the pace of development in a proprietary model. And a data point that I would give is that in the early, mid 2000s, when Linux had already been under development for 10 years, I took a measurement of the pace of change of the Linux kernel. And you would assume that it was kind of an asymptote, that a lot of the rough edges got worked off and then eventually it was just kind of smoothing out. But 10 years, a full decade after Linux came to the front, the Linux kernel was still actually on the opposite curve. It was accelerating. The pace of change as measured by commits to the kernel was accelerating a decade later. And that's because you can get this tremendous feedback cycle happening with a really strong and thriving community. And that pace of change actually ends up being really critical to understanding the business model implications. There's one more thing that I would put up here, and it's not there. It's kind of ironic. You would be able to see it. That's important about the open source realities, which affects the business model, is transparency. And you've got the fact that for the first time, people can see what's happening. If you look at the traditional route to market and the time to market from any traditional proprietary product, what you've got is you've got this long period where the product is being worked on, but it's in secret. Nobody knows. The market doesn't know what's happening. And the vendor waits until they're ready to launch the product, at which point they spring the information on the whole world. Now the whole world has to think about, what do I want to do with that information? Am I really willing to adopt that? Am I ready to adopt it? So you've got this serial process that takes a long time to actually get innovation into the marketplace. However, if you look at an open source development model where you've got community and you've got that kind of transparency, the engineering that is happening actually in the community is fully visible by anybody that wants to see that. They can see what's coming. They can see what releases are going to be coming. The pace of change, not just transparency, but the pace of change is so fast that you realize, okay, this piece of code might be rickety right now, but it's going to firm up pretty fast. So this ends up really fundamentally altering the nature of the business model, because now you've got a model that needs to be maximized around the idea that customers are going to want to engage early and often, possibly before the product or the code is really mature, but they want to get in there. They want to differentiate their systems, their infrastructure. They need this innovation. And it's that early engagement that is another fundamental attribute of a successful open source business model that has to be pulled into play. So quickly, what are the elements of I think we're going to go here. I just blew it. There we go. 4 commitments. If you're going to be in the business of open source, commercial open source, there are 4 fundamental commitments that need to be made. The first is that you've got the right engineering DNA. This is both the capability, but the culture of the engineering organization as well. The second is that you need to be truly open. I'm going to talk about each one of these, tell you what I mean by that. The third, if I can see this without my glasses there.
Customer enablement.
There we are, the customer enablement. Yeah, how do you engage the customer? As we said, we've got early access to code, we've got early designs, we've got architectures that are sometimes formalizing in real time. And then the fourth really is the financial model around this, because at some point we do need suppliers to be self-sustaining so that they can be there and be partners in this journey. So if you look at these 4 and you look at the first one, the DNA, the engineering engagement model is really very, very different. If you look at the proprietary model, we all know how this works. So it's an internal closed loop system. All of the repos are inside my building. I have total control over all of the code, and I can deliver the first version. I come back, I do my bug fixing, my feature advancement, come up with the second version, all down. We know this, but it's all in a contained closed loop system. Now, when you're talking about open source development, engineering is actually working in the community. right? You actually are, in effect, dispatching developers to go work on the community code. And then, when ready, bring a version of that up, put it through your qualification processes, your QA, your documentation, everything else, present that to the customer, and stand as that tension manager between what I'll call the unbridled enthusiasm of community development and the stability requirements and the planning horizon of a customer expectation. And in order to do this, in order to have this kind of development model be successful, the engineering team has to be just culturally invested in this idea that you're developing in the community. You cannot have the vendor-centric idea from the engineering side when you're working on this. Ultimately, there's a tension to be managed in there commercially as well. But this is absolutely fundamental, and it's very, very different from a proprietary software development model. The next point I would make is that you need to be truly open. This is the second of the 4 commitments. You can't head fake open. You know, it's like you look at a plate of ham and eggs, and the difference between the ham and the eggs is that the pig was committed. You know, you can't head fake the fact that you're open. What you can't do is you have to be very, very careful that you understand that the total value proposition of open source is open source. It's not that it's open to start with and then we're going to close the door later. You have to remain true to your roots and remember that that value proposition is what's driving the opportunity, and it takes time to build a business on this. You can't get cold feet. What you will see sometimes is, and it's perfectly legal, you'll see a supplier take a snapshot of an open source project, take it in-house, and then begin to work around that. Totally legal. People do that in the closed community. There's an entire industry around selling source code for certain things. So you can do that. You can take a snapshot of an open source project, and you come in. The moment you morph that and present that to a customer with a support contract, it's a fork. It's over. Because now you're starting to try and fix the thing that you sold them, which is beginning to diverge more and more from the community. So you can't fork. You have to choose freedom or forkdom. Those are the options. And then finally, you just have to constantly be a shining light in the community. You have to be there to co-develop, to drive agendas, to work together, and ultimately write code, write a lot of code. It sounds like a Dave Meyer tribute band up here, but Dave likes to say that in open source, in community, you know, code is the coin of the realm, and he's very right. So have the right engineering, the right DNA, be truly open, stick to your guns on that one. Then we get to the customer engagement model. Now, if you look at a proprietary model, what you would typically see is there's a sales cycle, and the customer buys a bunch of product with a support stream to it. And this is true of hardware, this is true of software, this is a traditional model. Now, when you're in open source, what do we say? Said, first of all, everybody has transparency into what's coming, so they know that they know what the community is going to be delivering. They want to engage on that early. It may not be mature. The customer's objectives may not be completely pinned down yet. So we're going to be working in a bit of a white space here together, and this picture ends up inverting that actually the first part of the engagement could be services. It could be training. It could be enablement. It could be helping with the first part of the rollout. And over time, if it's successful, because this is a shared success model, then there can be some software pricing that can be applied to the offering as well. So not only is it time shifted and inverted, but then the sum total is going to be smaller than the sum total of the proprietary model as well. You just have to realize that that is a fact. And that leads to this. The ROI model as a business in commercial open source is very different. If you look at the proprietary model versus the commercial, the proprietary is basically going to look like this, the closed model, where you've got your investment up front, but because the sale includes all of this product purchase up front, it quickly inverts you, puts you into a break-even position fairly early, and then there is the services line after that. Now, in the open source world, because your first engagements are probably going to be services-oriented, which are time and materials based as opposed to digitally based, there's going to take some time before you start to get, while you're doing the services, you're also still doing the engineering. So you've got a substantial engineering line on your P&L, and it takes more time before you cross over into the break-even spot. You will get there if you stick with it. If the shared success model pays out, you will get there. But my main point is if anybody's thinking about how they're going to frame a business model around open source in this room, somebody tell your CFO that it takes more time to get to the desired goal. At the end of the day, when it works, you get this mutual benefit. It's more of a partner type of engagement. It's a shared risk, shared reward kind of a model. And the industry needs more vendors who are capable of this because there's a lot of different attributes of open source and a lot of opportunity out there. So basically, this is it. It is a very distinctly different model than proprietary. You've got to have the DNA. You've got to be truly open. You have to know how to engage with the customers in this early model, and you have to understand the time to ROI, but the tangible benefits are there, and it is possible and necessary for there to be sustainable vendors in this open source arena. Look at there, 25 seconds to go.
You're awesome.
All right.
Thanks, Cal.